All right, a step in the right direction is our theme for 2021, and it's taken on different meanings as we move through the year. Here we are almost into November. We're still maneuvering through a COVID and post-COVID world, still questioning all our steps about big decisions and even the mundane things in life. Politics and economics are in the midst of whopping changes. Culturally, it feels like every day there are new insights into trends and norms that sweep in and out of our life, and they can be overwhelming. So looking back, I'm thankful that God led us to the book of Romans this year as a perfect text because it helps us to get a foundation for what faith is and for what love is. And faith is seen through the love that we have for others, and that's what we've been going through this year. No matter what way the wind blows in the storms of COVID or politics or economics or culture, faith and love are the marks, the identity of Christians, the children of God. And so last week when we looked at Romans 15, we had a reminder that the love of Jesus extends to the whole world. And Paul caught that mission. He wanted to share the love of Jesus throughout the world through word and deed, everywhere he went. And so he challenges all of the followers of Jesus to have a kind of love that extends beyond our own borders of our own little world. And this little detour mini-series, these 3 Sundays, including our weekend guest, is going to help us to know how we in small town Arcola can get a better glimpse of what God's big kingdom is like globally right here in 2021. So we start today with God's heart for the vulnerable. And next Sunday, God's heart for the unreached. I haven't spoke too much in my years here about my international mission experience. And so I'll weave a little bit of that in and out of these 2 sermons, especially next week, just a tiny bit here. But next week I'll get into it a little bit more. But when I was a 25-year-old single guy, almost 30 years ago now, actually, God put on my heart his calling to go to what was the newly called Russian Federation, after the 1991 breakup of the superpower, the Soviet Union. And so in fall of 1992, moved over to Moscow, and I was amongst one of the first wave of foreign missionaries to go to that land, bringing the gospel into post-atheistic and post-communist Russia. And for 15 years, I had the honor to get to live there and to help build foundations of faith in churches, especially amongst youth. And in the 15 years since I left Russia, the youth that we had back then have all grown up, and now they're raising their own youth. And that's really cool to be able to see that through Facebook and social media. I went to Moscow back in 1992, not really sure what I was doing, because there weren't people there already to be able to tell us, how do you do ministry in this part of the world? We were amongst the first to be able to do that. We made a lot of mistakes. Some of the things I look back and think, oh, the crazy mistakes we made back then. But the good news of the gospel overcomes, and there was many people that lives were changed because of what God was doing during that era, post-communism. Getting to share the message of Jesus, helping especially young people grow in their faith and using their God-given gifts in ministry. My main role was being a mentor and a friend, was able to support them in those early days. But it's not just missionaries and pastors who carry on a mission. It's a mission for everyone to take. And just because I moved back to America didn't mean that I wasn't a missionary anymore. We're all missionaries wherever we're at because we have a mission that God's given us to do, right? So we're all missionaries, even in a place like this where we live in small town Illinois. Because Jesus told his 12 disciples in John 20:21, he said, "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." And he wasn't talking to just the 12. He was talking to all of his disciples that would come in years to come. He's sending us as well. God is a sending God. He's a going God. God the Father sent, and God the Son sent to the world, both near and far. And there are 2 groups of people who were specifically called to go to, and that's the vulnerable and to the unreached. And as I said, today we'll look at the vulnerable. Tomorrow, or next Sunday, the unreached. Unreached means those who have no or limited access to the gospel message. And that'll be our focus next week, because there are still places in the world that don't have a church on every corner, that don't have access to Bibles and literature and all the things that we have here in this country that make it very possible. If a person's looking for God here, it's much easier to find it than in other places in the world. We'll look at that next week. But the vulnerable are those who, whether they're reached or unreached, it doesn't matter where they live, but they find themselves in situations where they have needs that are either being neglected or ignored, or there's no immediate answer to meet those needs. Jesus drew attention to the vulnerable in his story, a parable about the kind of people that know what it is to live in the kingdom of God. And God commends those who have reached out to the vulnerable. And we read this in Matthew 25, 34 to 36. Jesus says to those that are reaching out to the vulnerable, he says, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared to you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Whether it's the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned, when we minister to them, Jesus says we've ministered as unto Jesus himself. Because when a person is in crisis, they need the love of Jesus in a way that it may seem like a whole lot more. And how often did Jesus stop and meet the needs of those that were in crisis along his way? And he says, I want you to come along and meet the needs that are out there. But along with it, there are spiritual needs that can be met as well. And Jesus, when he focused on the physical needs, he also did not neglect the spirit. And he wants us to be able to do both, to be able to often reach the spirit through the physical needs that are out there. The Apostle James, in his epistle, he writes about what faith looks like. And he says, pure religion includes these three things. It says to watch our words, to guard our hearts from evil, and to reach out to the vulnerable, namely the widows and orphans. As we read in James 1, 26 and 27, it says, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, the person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. You know, it's like true religion that's not full of hypocrisy. It means we do watch our tongue. We watch what we say. And we live lives that are pure, that stand out different from the world. But we also reach out to those who are most vulnerable. We happen to live in a nation full of safety nets. We are very fortunate that we have that kind of world today, that there are countries and places that have safety nets so that the vulnerable can be caught, so that the government comes along and helps. There are systems in place. And through our taxes, they're taken care of. And kudos to a government that does this sort of thing. But originally, this was the job of the church. This was the job of God's people, not a government. And so it's easy to think, well, it's not my responsibility because we have programs to help with that. So why am I needed? And while our government nets are a blessing, we have to be careful that we as God's people do not become calloused in our hearts, that we don't care for those who are vulnerable. And it's very easy to us to sit back and say, well, somebody else is taking care of it, so we wipe our hands clean, and we don't really have to do anything to help those that are down and out in different ways. As long as people get the services provided for them, as long as they get their checks, as long as they get it, they're happy, then I'm happy, and I don't have to worry about it. But yet, the vulnerable need more than a check. They need more than affirmation. They need a place to belong. They need purpose in life. And their spiritual needs are the same as the spiritual needs of anybody else, needy or not. And as a result of their vulnerability, they might have a more open heart to what God can do in their lives. And definitely there are places around the world where there are not those safety nets. And so what do we as Christians, what can we do to be able to help those that don't have that kind of help? And that's what we're looking at these couple weeks here. When God established his nation of Israel, he gave them 10 commandments, and he gave them lots of sub-laws about how to love. And God gave his people instructions more than once. And if especially you look through the whole law of the Pentateuch there, you'll see that over and over he talks about 3 groups of people in specific that need help, and that's the sojourner, the widow, and the fatherless. For example, in Exodus 22, he says, "You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child." So he looks at these three groups of people here. When we look at the refugee, the sojourner, it might be a refugee, somebody that's forced out of their homes and lands. They've had to cut ties with their family and friends and their culture and their dreams of a future. No one is a refugee by choice. And while this is a hot political issue, let's, as Christians, put the politics aside and let's find hearts of compassion for those who have lost it all and need a safe place, a new start for themselves and their families. There needs to be proper channels for immigrants, but making it hard for them is adding burden upon burden. It could be that the refugee is already trusting God for their help. Maybe they're trusting God to come to their rescue. Or maybe through this uprooting in life, it opens up their hearts to God, to find a faith that would come through compassionate people that would reach out to them, people that have nothing in common with them from another part of the world that would say, "We accept you. We want you to have a place to belong. We want you to be safe and have your needs met." And through that, they see the love of Jesus. And contrary to all the social memes that are out there, no one's coming to take anything of ours. They're not coming to harm us. We live in a land of plenty with so many opportunities, and there's plenty to share. And yes, in every group there's going to be a crazy. There's going to be crazy nuts in our own group as well. But let's not do anything to oppress the sojourner or the refugee. Let's trust that God can use us and use our nation that is so blessed and set up in a way so that the extreme pain of the world can be made right and that injustice will be dealt with. However you want to look at it politically is our own conscience, but from a faith point of view, having compassion and an open hand and an open door to those that are suffering is not optional. Deuteronomy 10:19, "Love the sojourner, therefore, because you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." And back to Exodus 22, "You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him." So how does God show love to the sojourner? How does God give them food and clothing and things that they need? Does he just drop it out of the sky and give them a heavenly hug? He does it through his people. As we provide the material necessities and as we give them the hugs and the welcome. The sojourner in the land could be a refugee, but perhaps there are others who feel like a stranger in the land. When someone's moved to a new place, if you've ever had to do that, move to a new place, you know what it is to be the sojourner in the land. You don't know people, you're building connections, you're trying to find that community there, and it takes time. And to have people that are welcoming and saying, "We want you to be a part of our community, we want you to be a part of our neighborhood," that is a great way to reach out to a sojourner in that way. It takes time to feel like you're a part of a new place to live. And when people extend their friendship, it's like a cup of cold water in a dry land. And moving transitions are full of opportunities, but they're lonely ones. If you've gone through it, you know what it's like. College students going away to school need good friends. They need a spiritual home to belong, especially when everything they've ever known is being challenged in their lives. You know, we get asked all the time, "How's your son Elisha doing?" And you know, his classes are going well. He's learning a lot. He's doing really well. But his very first week of college, he was meeting people and starting friendships with the kind of people that we wanted him to be able to have there. Because there were people who welcomed him into their lives. I'm not just talking about other college students. We're talking about people that lived in the community of Evansville. People in churches and Christians that said, "These college kids are coming here and we want to love on them. And we want to embrace them and let them be a part of our community." And people of all ages. And I'm serious, he has had senior citizens invite him over to their home and where he could feel like he's a part. And they'll pray for him. And I mean, that was happening the first couple of weeks of college. And his parents were sitting back and going, "We know that he's in good hands, that God has sent people to help him." And I know that's not an individual story. It happens all the time. But when there are people that are willing to do what God wants them to do and embrace the sojourner in their land, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think we don't have a college town for that, but yet we need to embrace those that come into our lives from another place. The sojourner could also be a traveler on a journey, somebody that needs refreshment from people along the way that makes their travel burdens lighter. And back in Bible times, getting around was a lot more complicated, of course. And there weren't drive-through fast food, and there weren't hotels all along the way. So if you were traveling back in these days, when you'd come through a town, you were dependent on people to help you to get food and shelter. And God said, I want my people to be the kind of people that whoever's coming through town, they say, our door's open. We'll share with you what God has given to us and help the sojourner, the traveler, on their way. We never know when a stranger might be an angel in disguise, but something that we have control over is being like an angel to strangers. Wouldn't it be a great miscalculation if some stranger meets us and we help them out and they leave and they go tell everybody, God must have sent an angel on the way. I don't even know if that person was real or if that was just an angel in disguise. Wouldn't that be great to be mistaken for an angel because we've helped others along their way? Going on from the sojourner to the widow. What could be said of the widow could also be said of the widower, but in societies where women were dependent upon a husband for provisions and safety, their lives were especially found to be in danger. We live in a society where we have more structures and family to build those things up, but that's not found everywhere. Not only the loss of a mate is a hard road to take, but it develops a new kind of dependency on others that comes with that loss. Something that could leave a person feeling very vulnerable. While family often comes to the rescue, that's not always the case. And that's where the spiritual family comes along as well. We step out, not to just meet material needs, but to meet the need for companionship and to find a way to help with the newfound loneliness. It's not just those who have lost a mate through death, but maybe through divorce or who live in a lonely or abusive marriage. Let's not forget the single adult who's never married. The definition of a widow grows wider when we look at the relationship structures that break down due to various things, not only death. Because being alone or being lonely can make a person vulnerable on different levels. In God's society, coming along the widow for provision and support is a sign of care that reflects God's heart for those who mourn and those who live in a more lonely life without somebody beside them. Moving on to the fatherless. It's a term that's used for orphan who could be in that position because their parents have died, or maybe because the parents are neglecting the basic fundamental needs of a child. It could refer to a child who's been abandoned by a mother or a father or living in maybe a single parent situation, or living in a home where a parent is physically gone too much. Or maybe they're there, but they're very emotionally distant. In our own country, we don't see that many true orphans, but we see the insufficient parenting that plagues millions. And our foster care system is bursting at the seams. They have more children than they have families to take them. We also live in a land where unwanted children are aborted rather than given a family who will take them as their own. And while adoption has become more acceptable, the systems for fostering and adoption and these systems are broken and they're expensive and there's so many hoops to jump through and we need to try to make it more possible so that these children can get the families that they need without the high cost and all those bureaucratic hoops. And many are just discouraged from even trying because it's so complicated. And people that have gone through the system, they know that it's a major struggle to be able to make those provisions, but it's worth the sacrifice. But when people come alongside with love that overcomes barriers, they create really beautiful stories. I mean, having been part of an adoption story myself, I find that these adoption stories are the most greatest tear-jerking kind of stories. When kids find their families, then they could be loved and accepted and belong. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's happy tears that they get a family, but it's also sad tears that there are millions of kids out there that don't have that and grow up never knowing what that love and care and safety is. So both locally and internationally, adoption is happening, but not at the same rate as fatherlessness is happening. Many Christians are being part of the solution, doing for one what they wish they could do for all. At our nearby Walnut Grove church, there are a total of 14 kids at that church that have either been adopted in recent years or in the process of getting adopted. Their church is just going gangbusters, trying to help solve the problem of these fatherless kids. So, whether we can do it ourselves or we can support others that are doing it, to be a part of that is a great way to be able to show the love of God and to carry out his mission. There's a category of kids that are growing up in homes where poor parenting contributes to a really rough upbringing. There are kids that aren't being nurtured well. Their emotional and relational health suffers because of that. And they need other adults to come alongside and provide for them what they're missing at home. And that's a big shout out to teachers in the school, because they become, in a way, surrogate parents for a lot of these kids, teaching them things that they're not getting at home, to be able to help them to do well in their future lives. I think a lot of times parents are the greatest teachers are the greatest positive role models that some of these kids have. But as neighbors and friends, we kind of know who these kids are. We need to come alongside with them and reach out to them and help give them some of that care that's needed. And to reach out to the parents who aren't doing a good job, because maybe through relationship, we can help teach them and model how to do better in their parenting. And we can reach out and help that. Actually, reaching out to the fatherless really describes my 15 years in Moscow greatly. Being a youth pastor there, and I felt like I was a surrogate dad to most of these kids, because most of these kids lived in homes. They had homes they went to every night. Most of them did, not all of them, but their parents were either doing a poor job at parenting, or they were just gone working all the time and not involved in their kids' lives. The whole latchkey kid thing was very, very strong there. And I felt like I spent my 15 years just nurturing young people. They were at my apartment all the time. We were out doing things together, involved in the church stuff together. And I felt like a dad to all these kids, because they were looking up to a positive role model in their lives. And that's what I did for 15 years. I was a dad to these kids before I ever had even my own children. And I still feel a tight bond with so many of these young people that today were part of my life back then. When we come alongside the refugee and the widow and the orphan, then we're living out the love of God. And we find ways for the gospel to be shown through word and deed, what we were talking about last week. So both near and far, we need to have missionaries that go with their calling to help those that have needs that God's equipped them to meet. So how can we do this? To love the sojourner means to show love to strangers and to our new neighbors and to the refugee and immigrant who might come to our land. We live in a town where there's many foreign-born choosing to settle here. And we have opportunities to bring unity and community. The word community has the word unity in it. It's bringing people in a society together. We can do that in the name of our faith in Jesus. We need to work for legislation that helps the process for the vulnerable to be able to come to a land where they have equal chances to make a life for themselves without threats. To love the widow means including those who might be alone or lonely. Seek ways to help out if practical help is needed. To love the fatherless means that we do what we can to help to ease this problem and see that children near and far could grow up with the loving family relationships. It's seeing that we have room for more and helping others that help that can add to their families. Maybe there's others adopting or fostering that we could come alongside. It's reaching out to children or youth that don't have a positive parental influence. And we can do it here, and we can do it far away, because there's parts of the world where the sojourner, the widow, and the fatherless are in greater numbers than we experience in our own country. They don't have the safety nets that the government provides. And statistically, the global problem of the sojourner and the widow and the fatherless, it's heartbreaking. So we can send people, we can send aid, we can send our prayers to be a part of that global focus as we do our part to help them carry the load. But it seems overwhelming. You think, what can I do? But we have to ask ourselves, if it comes down to just do for one what you wish you could do for many. In our own church budget, we have a little bit of money set aside to be able to help projects that help the vulnerable. We have an orphanage in Honduras that we participate in. We're a part of rescuing children from sex trafficking in the Dominican Republic and building a counseling program for youth in Zambia, Africa. Those are three things that we give a little bit to, but we can at least do for one. Maybe we could give more, and our church could do more for these projects and others that come along our way. It's a good time to evaluate that as we think about our budget for the next year. Is that something that we could increase? Is that something we could do more for others out there? There are people who, they send their $35 a month to World Vision or Compassion to be able to support a child in another part of the world. There are organizations, Christian organizations, that will give children, food for their family. They'll give them an education. They'll give them the medical services they need. But they're connected to a local church that's working there with them. And so it brings the gospel to people. So anytime you have a chance to support a kid for that $35 a month, through organizations like that. If you want more questions how to do it, I can definitely hook you up with that. But they're just great ways that you can at least do for one what you can't do for everybody. But if we're all doing it together, we can make that happen. Whether it's building wells, hospitals, refugee camps, there's a host of so many ways Christians are on the front lines, and they are making the world a better place. And the greatest movements out there that are trying to make the world a better place are not coming from government agencies, but from Christians who are coming alongside and doing that work. And it's a great testimony to the mission that Jesus has given to us. He wants us to love the vulnerable, and he wants us to be able to do that in his name. As Jesus, when he went around, we read in Matthew 9, that he went around throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." We don't have to go to the Congo or Uzbekistan to change the world. We don't have to be wealthy or brilliant or a spiritual giant to change the world. Because if we have the love and compassion of Jesus, we can change the world, both near and far, one person at a time. Because we all know vulnerable people who don't know Jesus, but we know vulnerable people that do know Jesus, and it doesn't matter. We show the love to everyone, and so that helps. God has a dream for this world, and that Jesus said is the kingdom of God, and he created each of us to play an important role in that kingdom of God, and he's invited us to join him in that. So we keep doing that, and I'd love to see us as First Christian Church keep reaching out near and far to the vulnerable who need a voice, who need that help.